Lexington and Saratoga I've done as battle cruisers. I've talked about what what they would have been like as battle cruisers. Seemed only appropriate to talk about them as aircraft carriers. But it also seemed appropriate as this is episode 10, ship 10 of series 3 of this particular batch of key ships. And I have to admit, when I get back from Australia, this is a funny thing to think about, because this will be airing out after I've got back from Australia, because I get back from Australia, all things going well, on the 27th. Lovely. Touch wood, everything's perfect, everything's being gone off to the plan, we've all had a great time, we've learnt a lot of history, we've managed to get a lot of recording done, and we're going to be able to give you a lot of history from it. So, thank you for all the support that's made it possible. But it's funny to think that I'm recording this on the 20th of May. And it's going to be recorded and it won't be coming out for 2, 3, let's see, 4, 5, 6, nearly 7 weeks. Nearly 7 weeks. Well, I hope you enjoyed the videos I've loaded up loaded up for you all. They should be fun. They should be fun, and it should give you something enjoyable to watch, along with what have hopefully been, if everything has gone to plan, a lot of lives from wandering around. A lot of lives wandering around Australia. Hopefully, you will enjoy all those. Now, Lexington and Saratoga as aircraft carriers. I'm going to be looking at their technology, and I'm going to try and get this done in 20 minutes. Mainly because I think each of these ships deserve their own videos. But I also felt I couldn't do a tech series about ships and key ships and include their battlecruiser forms and not do something which discusses them as aircraft carriers and what they do. And I would like to add that I have a sneaking suspicion it is these ships which make the US Navy quite so worried about the battle carrier concept. But we'll leave that for a second. Shameless book plug. Shameless book plug. Right then. So, new core for the scouting force. That is what they are, okay? You know, we come up with all sorts of reasons for them. I listened to someone the other day describing them, and this was in a conference paper, they were talking about them. And I wasn't at the conference, I was listening to it online. I should really go to some conferences in person soon. And they were describing them and going, well, while the US Navy built strike carriers, I think they actually went for call them strike assault carriers at one point. In the form of Lexington Saratoga, the Japanese Navy built fleet carriers, and the Royal Navy built. I can't remember what you said is the use of them. I think they were describing them as information carriers. Yes, information carriers. So their characterization was these were strike assault carriers, the Japanese carriers were fleet carriers, and the Royal Navy's carriers were information carriers. And I remember thinking it was probably a good job I wasn't in the room, because the questions I would have asked would have been particularly cruel and painful. Because I'm not sure why they would even bring this up in a paper which was theoretically around capital ship design and other treaties. So why they bring up aircraft carrier design orientation, I wasn't quite sure how they got into it, and also how they could be quite so wrong. But we'll leave that to one side, and I'm sure when I have a nice one-on-one one with them at some point, and I manage to have an individual discussion with them, I'm sure I'll manage to find out where exactly their ideas came from. And maybe I'll be able to persuade them to my perspective. Maybe they'll be able to provide information which will be so compelling it'll persuade me to their perspective. But I would like to say to know that as far unless someone produces startling information, and I mean startling documents that will prove it, these were not built as strike assault carriers. For starters, they're not carrying US Marines. Not that large a detachment anyway, enough for to justify assault definition in my mind. And they're built for the scouting force. If anyone's building information carriers, it's the US Navy. And it makes perfect sense. Okay? So what was the purpose of these? The battle cruisers. For the US Navy, they were all about the information warfare. They were about finding out where the enemy was. They were about limiting the enemy's ability to find out where they were. They were about conducting commerce interdiction. They were about keeping knowledge and presence over a wide area. Yeah, you can do that with a sexy carrier just as well as you can do that with a sexy battle cruiser. In reality, you could do it better with both. Let's be honest, the sexiest version would be both of those teaming up. Oh yeah. And you never know. Under that scenario, someone might decide they don't have to stick 8-inch guns on top of this ship. So, guess what I found? Yes, there were some pop-pops. Not sure when they entered into it. Tried re-uploading the original, didn't like it. So, for what would be roughly the next 4 minutes, this is me, this is the 4th of July, and I'm continuing from where I started. Do apologise. They're conceiving these as aircraft carriers. They are converting what is probably the best capital ship to convert into an aircraft carrier, battle cruisers. And actually, battle cruiser hulls are probably the best hulls to do it. As I've already been over, the US Navy were looking for information warfare vessels, and that's what they were building. Now, I mentioned in the video, when I did the original recording, that someone had, not long before I recorded it, actually asked me, how would we make a modern battlecruiser? I'd said, honestly, the best probable hull you can do is take a modern aircraft carrier hull, like the Ford class or the Queen Elizabeth class, cut it down, and build up. And probably cut it down to about a deck below the hangar level. And start working out stuff from there in terms of hull shaping and designing. Because it is a really good hull to use. It is a really good hull to use. So thanks to their length and to beam ratio and the size it gives them and the space it gives them, they're very good ships, what they are used for and what they're going to be used for. They'd have been better as a combination. I've already mentioned this and I will keep mentioning this. The absolute best combination you could have, and if you look at how Force H works, this is a good example in World War II, and Force K before that. If you can team up a fast carrier, or a couple of fast carriers, with a couple of fast capital ships, if you can team up that group together, you can get a seriously effective combat force. It's one of the really interesting things when we're looking at history in terms of Force Z, but also some of the operations of, well, of the US Navy and the USS Robin, of Saratoga and the USS Robin. If they are combined with, if they could have been combined with a couple of fast capital ships, just think how much more effective that force would have been. Suitable fast capital ships that could have kept up with them. Pretty much you're talking about still afloat at the time and actually theoretically available would be HMS Renown. If she'd been free, and I'm trying to think of another suitable fast capital ship available at the time. Hood's gone, Repulse is gone. The King George V's aren't really as fast as you want them to be. You need a 30-knot ship. No one else really available hanging around in terms of allied ships at this point, other than Renown. That's quite a scary thing to think about, considering what they start World War II with. But it's true, is that the most effective force you could have built, and actually, considering what Renown does, she epitomizes it, working with Ark Royal usually. But imagine what she'd have been like working with Lexington and Saratoga. They would have been, theoretically, 3 battle cruisers together. Admittedly, 2 are now in carrier form. They're a very capable and flexible design. And that's thanks to their hull design, thanks to their internal structure, their internal volume, as much as anything. And that is the basis which the US Navy will draw from to develop its fleet. The most important thing that needs to be remembered, though, is that these ships are allocated, designed, developed, launched in 1927, all under the auspices of the Washington Naval Treaty. Let me emphasize that again. The Washington Naval Treaty. That means, under the Washington Treaty, there are cumulative limits to capital ships. There are cumulative limits to aircraft carriers. There are only individual tonnage displacement limits to cruisers and below. All ships which are not capital ships or aircraft carriers are limited to a maximum displacement of 10,000 tons. However, you are allowed to build as many as you want. Please note that for what I say next. So when someone turns around to me and says, oh, the reason the Lexington class aircraft carriers had 8-inch guns on them was because under the treaties they couldn't build enough cruisers, I am absolutely gobsmacked, because this is someone who's obviously thought about it a lot and actually considered the treaties, but hasn't read the treaties. Because the London Naval Treaties of 1930 and 1936-ish, they limit your overall cumulative tonnage of cruisers. They produce the new heavy cruiser and light cruiser categories. They produce all that fun. But they don't come in till 1930. And they have been launched and commissioned in November 1927. So, no. Just no. No. That is not the reason they have them. They have 8-inch guns because probably 2 things. One, and I'll get into this again further on, institutional bias towards gunnery in ship design. And 2, Congress are tight and won't provide the US Navy with enough cruisers. That's it. It's not because of anyone going, we can build these things. They need 8-inch guns. The treaties limit them, so they need the 8-inch guns to defend them because the treaties mean that we can't have enough ships to defend them. No, there are no limits. If it's below 10,000, if it's 10,000 tons stand displacement or below, you can build as many of them as you like. There is no limit. You can festoon each carrier going out with a whole squadron of cruisers, should you so wish. And under that circumstances, if you really turned around to me and went, with 9 cruisers sitting around this carrier, I still want to have 8-inch guns on her, I would honestly ask you, Why are you so obsessed with 8-inch guns, and what are you compensating for? Seriously? I would ask, why are you pursuing such an inefficient design at them? Because you're going to add so much weight so high up in the ship. You're taking up so much space from hangar space, from internal volume, from deck space. And that's before you get on to actually operating the guns. In fact, as far as deck operations and flight operations, you are going to cause yourself a nightmare with those guns. And let's please be honest, you have 8-inch guns on that flight deck. Two pair forward, 2 pair aft. Super firing, lovely, but still. If they are firing to starboard, that's fine. You have cases discharging and other things discharging, which could go flying onto the deck and obstruct the aircraft. If they're firing to port, good luck, you won't be able to fly your aircraft, because they'll be blasting at them. They use those 8-inch guns, they are not launching or recovering aircraft in any way, shape or form. They just aren't. You can't do those things simultaneously. Not unless you want to kill a lot of pilots. Or probably only one pilot, because the first plane will do it under orders, the rest will probably cut engines and just go, well, you might as well just shoot me, because there's a better way to go than that. So, no. Next scenario. Well, what happens if they get caught by a cruiser? Or something else which has got through? Well, yes, you have the same armament as some cruisers do, and that's very nice. But that's also a scenario of you have the same armament as a cruiser and you are, let's see, 3 times the displacement at best of most cruisers. A little bit more than that, 37,000 tons in standard as built. So let's be honest, nearly 4 times the displacement of most cruisers. You're kind of a giant frigating target. Yeah, you have an armoured belt of between 5 and 7 inches. Yes, you have an armoured deck of between 0.75 and 2 inches. You have 0.75 inches around the gun turrets. Oh great, so you have lots of explosives going up to them and basically splinter protection. Bulkheads between 5 and 7 inches thick. Oh, that's good. That's survivability there. 16 water tube boilers. 180,000 shaft horsepower. That's 130,000 kilowatts of power generation. Top speed, theoretically 34.5 knots. Now that's often listed as actual top speed. Sorry, the screen just flashed at me, so I'm hoping that's alright, but I'll just read. Now, the 34.5 knots is often listed as their actual top speed. Again, suspicions may vary. Lots of suspicions may vary. But she is using 4 sets of turbo-electric transmission, and she is... how do I put this politely? She is therefore to an extent limited to an extent by the amount of revolutions those systems can produce. Those systems are sometimes more efficient than others. But it's a good design. There is a theoretical idea that these ships were slower than a specifically designed aircraft carrier would have been, but honestly in this period I can't see many carriers actually going faster. You could in theory build a faster carrier, but what this would have gained in having an extra knot and a half in top speed versus lost in terms of protection is probably not worth it. But again, you have those 8 twin 8-inch guns. You also have 12 single 5-inch guns, and you honestly wonder if they sort of used a 5 inches or more dual-purpose mount. And they have got them mounted properly. This is something I would like to say about the Americans. You can be rude about the fact that they put the 8-inch guns up there. I am, because the Americans were rude about it themselves and were going, yeah, we were basically forced into this one by the Bureau of Ships, who didn't really understand about aircraft. And, you know, basically the Bureau of Ordnance and also the people in charge of guns going, you have to have guns. And it's the case of, why? Because what exactly out there can catch us if we're going 34.5 knots or whatever speed we can do in rough seas, which is probably going to be equivalently higher than anything else that can chase us, and we've got a good reconnaissance up with our aircraft. What is going to catch us? Especially if we had an escorting cruiser. Why do we need the 8-inch guns? What do we really... Under what scenario do you want to be in that they are using their 8-inch guns? Because, let's go through again. What can catch them? What can catch them? For most of the prior Japanese heavy cruisers, they could get to roughly 33 knots. Then you have, I think it's the Miyako class, from memory. They come in and are able to do 35.5 knots, but it's not till you get to the Megamis that they can do 37 knots. Which are significantly after these ships. But again, yes, they've got an extra 2 knots of speed. Or 2.5 knots. But they have to work up to that, and if you're doing 34 knots and you're also flying off airstrikes, what's the odds of them getting close? This whole purpose of this ship is supposed to be a reconnaissance and information asset, area control asset. Your basic entire reasoning for having the 8-inch guns is, if that fails, if the aircraft fail, and they get past a screen of cruisers and other scanning vessels, and our destroyers, because destroyers are going to be part of are going to be escort group, we will need guns to defend ourselves. And by the way, those guns will stop us operating the aircraft, which are our very best means of keeping track on the enemy, and actually impeding their ability to track us down. And by the way, we're going to have a lot less armor than they do. In reality, because our armor is supposed to cover a lot more of the ship. I would say, when dealing with the Japanese cruisers, actually, probably the Lexingtons were better armoured than them. But that's not a good thing. You don't want your carrier going out there and engaging in fights. And I speak of this as the British naval historian, okay? Yes, HMS Formidable did get involved in the Battle of Matapan. We tried for her not to. But she's an armoured carrier and she has guns, and so she feels she should get involved. It's the same with HMS Unicorn conducting shore bombardment in the Korean War. You know, the Americans remember that one of their battleships got fired at by a single artillery shell and decided to return with a full broadside. Well, you might go testy there. HMS Unicorn was on light carrier support duties, basically providing engineering support. She got fired at. She sails close enough to use her 4-inch guns to bombard them. Okay, this is not what you want aircraft carriers to do. And that's even in this period, in the 1920s, when they are designing and building, well, rather, converting the battlecruisers into these areas. It's understood this is not necessarily a good idea. These are ships which have a lot of fuel running around them. And remember, the Americans do not develop the same fuel management system as the British. Okay? It's one of the really interesting things, that, as I've said before in many videos, and I will always say this, most of the best British technology in World War 2 comes out of the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 30s, 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 40s abject trauma the Royal Navy suffered in World War One. Okay? The reason the Royal Navy has a fuel management system which includes draining all the fuel lines back into stores well below the hangar deck and keeping it very separated with lots of protections from any possible source of fire is because of Ben Maisheri and other vessels and the fires that broke out of them during World War One when they were attacked. The same reason why does the Royal Navy develop a night strike an aerial night strike capability that can specialize in harbor attacks? Wilhelmshaven. Okay? Most of the Royal Navy's developments in naval aviation, etc., are due to trauma from World War One. Most of the US Navy's developments in the 1920s and 30s are due to, and some of their best technologies they develop, and they do this really well, and this class is a good example of this in some ways, are them trying to come up with new ways to carry out what they wish they could have done in World War One. And I think part of the reason this class gets 8-inch guns, I really do, is because partially they're the maximum you can fit on a carrier under the Washington Treaty. But also, it's because they are replacing the battle cruisers, and the battle cruisers were what, the Lexington class battle cruisers were what the US Navy really wanted. They wanted to be able to do the reconnaissance role. They wanted to be able to hunt down Graf Spee, von Spee and the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. They wanted to be able to do the Battle of the Falkland Islands. They wanted to be able to do what the Royal Navy and the Japanese Navy were doing. They wanted that. Because they saw that as true naval power in play. The Battle of Jutland wasn't the true naval power as far as they were concerned. That's just something you do because you have to. That's part of sea control, but that's not true naval power. True naval power is being able to dominate oceans the other side of the world from your home ports and dictate what goes on there. That's true naval power, and that's what the US Navy wanted. They wanted the information, they wanted the presence. And ultimately, I suppose they wanted the 8-inch guns in case the aircraft turned out to be terrible, and then they got some, well, let's be honest, moderately terrible cruisers out of it. Because there is no way you'd want to use that as a cruiser. There is no scenario where you think, you know what, I'm going to go fight a cruiser fight with that cruiser with this carrier. At no point. It's just not a sensible thing. I love this picture though, because you've got CV-1 Langley here, and you've then got Lexington and Saratoga, CVs 2 and 3. And this shows the birth of US naval aviation and their carriers coming through. But also, and I will point this out, there is a destroyer here, there is a 4-stacker here. One of probably the best destroyer designs that comes out of World War One, and certainly one of the best destroyer designs in the 1920s. And its close proximity to me to naval aviation shows the fact that the destroyer becomes what it does under the auspices of naval aviation. If you think about it, theoretically, a capital ship, whether it's a battleship or a cruiser, with its rapid-firing secondary guns and all those things, can defend itself with its heavy armour, etc., from pretty much any threat. But an aircraft carrier can't. An aircraft carrier needs a destroyer and its torpedoes around, because if a capital ship, i.e. a Congo class or something, really does manage to get in under the air attack, you need to take that thing out quick. And let's be honest, unless a cruiser is packing torpedoes, it has as much chance against that capital ship as I do of turning this pencil blue just by thinking about it. It's not going to happen. But if the carrier is able to give warning and its destroyer escort can form up, then There you go. I always thought it was a very sad thing that one of these vessels was lost. I thought it was an incredibly sad thing that it was Lexington. I love both of them. But the namesake vessel of the class being lost always leaves an impression. And she was sunk in the first carrier battle in history, the Battle of Clarke. Officially, well, yes, the first carrier battle in history. I'm not going to go into the various other options and, things you can put forward as alternative points. Basically, seaplane carriers logging out at various points. It's the first true carrier battle. And she does well in Coral Sea, despite that. Saratoga, she's torpedoed twice. She managed to sink the Ryujo in mid-1942. She serves in the Indian Ocean, along with HMS Illustrious and Admiral Somerville. She serves in the Southwest Pacific areas. She stopped being a training ship to go and assist in the Battle of Iwo Jima and is damaged by kamikazes. But again, she takes more damage than some of the other carriers which are far near vessels could take. And she does this because she is a converted battlecruiser, which is a testimony to the strength of the Lexington-class battlecruiser design, to my mind. I consider them always battlecruiser two words. They are battlecruisers in the original sense of the word. They're not built to fight other battlecruisers, they're built to dominate the world. The US Navy has other ships that dominate other enemy battlecruisers with. I think probably the worst thing about Saratoga's story, the worst thing, is that she's not preserved. She is sunk as part of Operation Crossroads, with nuclear weapon tests. But it does also give you a bit of an interesting framework for her life. She's conceived as a battlecruiser when the gun rules supreme. And she's sunk as a demonstration, well, as a test of world-ending weapons. Well, potentially world-ending weapons. They had a history. They did. The question, I've done this before, I've done a whole video on this about what would have happened if the Lexington class had completed 3 for 3. 3 battle cruisers, 3 as battle cruisers and 3 as aircraft carriers. And I, to this day, will always believe that would have been a truly tremendous thing for the US Navy. I think it might have changed a lot of doctrines. Because I think if you'd had 3 such groups, they might not have deployed the battle fleet forward. And that's really today's question. The US Navy, under the treaty system, and we're not going to say what the counterparts are, but you can say equivalent things for the Royal Navy and equivalent things for the Japanese Navy within the treaty limitations, otherwise unchanged. I'd like to hear your thoughts on what you think might have happened in terms of deployment of forces in the run-up to World War II, Pearl Harbor, specifically that scenario, if the US Navy does have 3 battle cruisers and 3 aircraft carriers of Lexington types. So 3 vessels are built as battle cruisers, as originally designed. They have been suitably modified and upgraded in intervening years. And 3 are built as aircraft carriers, without the 8-inch guns. Because, again, think of what's the necessity of them carrying 8-inch guns when you've got battle cruisers running around as their partners with 16-inch guns? No. So they all have had more 5-inch guns as armaments, and maybe they'll even had some twin 5-inch mounts from the early point onwards, general purpose. Let's see, they originally carried 12 single 5-inch A guns. 4 twin 5-inch guns each side. Question is going to be, if you've got 3 such groups, do you deploy your battle fleet, even if you're Roosevelt, who is trying to do everything on the most possible, do you deploy your battle fleet to Hawaii when you've got those 3 operating there? Or do you let your battle fleet operate from back from the west coast? Do you keep it safe? And if so, how does that change things? Do the Japanese still consider Hawaii such a good place to attack if all they're going to find in there is a single aircraft carrier and a single battle cruiser? Is it worthwhile sending that mighty fleet to go, the Kido Butai, to go and hunt it down? I'll be interested to see what you say. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care.